I'm going to show you how you can manage the Windows Firewall using group policy. So currently I'm logged onto one of the client servers and I'm just going to open the Windows Firewall. And then we can see that currently all of the profiles are active and we've got inbound and outbound rules. Now all of these profiles as well as the rules are managed independently on this server. So anyone who has administrator permissions on the server can come in and they can turn the firewall off, or they can add or remove any of the inbound or outbound rules. So what we want to do is create a group policy that manages all of this for us. So if I move over to my domain controller and then open up group policy management, then under group policy objects we can create a new object and just call this Windows Firewall Service. You can call yours whatever you want. And then if we right click and go to edit, and then under policies, and then Windows settings, security settings, and then Windows Defender Firewall, we can press the Windows Defender Firewall and this will bring us up our firewall settings. So if we press Windows Defender Firewall properties, in here we can configure our firewall to how we want. So for the domain profile, we're just going to set this all to recommended and default. And then for settings, we'll set the display notification to no and then set the rest to default. Now we will cover this apply local firewall rules in a minute, but for the time being we'll just set this to default. And then the same for the private profile. And then the same again for the public profile. So now we've got all our settings applied. We can press apply. We can see what the rules are so that the Windows Defender Firewall is on. Inbound connections that do not match a rule are blocked, and the outbound connections that do not match a rule are allowed. That is just standard how it comes. So we just want to deploy the default policy to all of the servers. Now, if we want, we can add custom inbound and outbound rules. So say if we wanted to add a rule that says for all of the servers, we want port 12345 on TCP. We want that enabled so we can allow the connection on, let's say, just the domain. We can do in TCP 12345. So now this rule will get deployed to every server that has this policy applied. So we can just close our group policy for the time being and then link this to an OU. So the way I have my Active Directory set up is that all of my servers are within the servers OU. So I will just pull this group policy object over the servers to link it. So now any server that is within this server's OU will get this policy. So if we go back to our Windows server, we can see that the domain profile is currently off. But if we force a GP update, we'll see that once this runs, it will automatically enable that firewall for us. And it should pull that new rule that we just created to open port 12345 inbound. So if we refresh now with F5, we can see for your security, some settings are controlled by group policy. The firewall is now on. And if we go to the Windows Defender Firewall properties, we can't actually make any changes because it's pulled from group policy. So even if someone has local administrator permissions on the server, they can't make any changes because it is pushed by the policy. And then again, if we go to inbound rules, we can see our new in TCP 12345 port is enabled. And again, we can't modify this because the rule has been applied by the system administrator and can't be modified. That is how you push the Windows Defender Firewall settings and then push any inbound and outbound rules. But the way we've currently done it is if someone has administrator permissions on the server, there's nothing stopping them coming in and doing new rule, port, all local ports, allow the connection, and then we do all in. So now they've essentially not turned it off, but they've allowed every port inbound, and they've basically just bypassed the entire firewall. So if I just delete that, or disable it because I don't actually want it, but if we come back to our group policy, and then do edit, and then under the exact same place, Windows Defender Firewall, and then if we go to the Windows Defender Firewall properties, under settings there is this rule merging. Now by default this is set to yes, so what this means is any rules that are pushed by group policy will be enabled, as well as any rules that are already on the server, they will be enabled as well. So this all in, if I just re-enable it, this will work. So even though this has been created on the local server, because this rule merging is currently enabled, it will allow both the group policy rules and the local firewall rules to be enabled. But if we change this to no, and the local security rules to no, what this will do is, and we apply that, when this next updates, all of these other rules won't work. They'll essentially be disabled. Even though they'll show as a tick, they won't work because they haven't been pushed by the group policy. So this rule, you need to be very careful with, because if you set it to no, it will essentially block every rule unless you specifically add it to the inbound and outbound rules here. So I've pushed rule 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 with TCP inbound to enable it. So that is the only inbound port that will work. Now all of the outbound ports will still work because the outbound connections that do not match a rule are allowed. But the only matching inbound rule will be this TCP 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So if you do enable that setting, you just need to make sure that you go through and identify which ports you do actually need from here, and then create a manual policy within the inbound rules. Now what you can do is on the server, you can create this to how you want. So this is on the client server, and then right click and export the policy, and then it creates a WFW policy file extension. Then in group policy, you can then right click your Windows Defender and do import policy, and then import that WFW file, and then that will create all of these rules and security rules for you, and then deploy it that way so you don't miss anything. But if you do go down the route of enabling this rule merging, just be very careful that it can break a lot of things if you don't have the rules manually set in place. Initially, I would recommend just leaving these as yes until you know exactly what you're doing, just to be on the safe side, as well as when you actually apply it to an organizational unit, just apply it to an organizational unit with 1 or 2 servers as a test, just so you know it's going to work as expected before you call the firewalls on your domain.